So, final question. We keep kind of we're tending in this direction anyway. So I'd like to kind of wrap up by really naming some of these things concretely. What are some practical processes or sets of questions or steps or perspectives? So someone that's thinking this through, going, okay, I get this concept. I'm on board. I would love to start this Tuesday. Like I want to like how do we this doesn't. I think one of the things that becomes a bit of a barrier in this process is that because we are specifically talking about entirely new and in many senses unnatural.
Yes.
Because the natural way of relating is the way we're already relating, right? So how can people, if you're beginning to kind of get your head around this, you're saying, yes, I want to do this, what are some structured ways that you can begin to incorporate a posture of empowering your spouse, ideally both and,
yes,
in the relationship, just like right off the bat, right from so a couple that have already been named, and then we can see if we can push this out that I'm hearing you say.
Yeah.
One is be really intentional and actually set rules. And I've seen this in my own relationship and in our marriage. Like build your own language.
Yes. Good.
Like it sounds cheesy,
no,
but really do. I like when you were talking about that. I remembered very early on, probably within the first maybe 8 months or so that Mindy and I were married, had this really defined time where we were out with some friends. We got going on a topic. I, as I tend to do, started waxing eloquent about these things that I think and how important this issue is and scriptural stuff and all these different things. And we got home and very sweetly and very correctly, Mindy just pointed out to me that, it's a little hurtful to me sometimes when on an area that's so obviously important to you, I'm hearing it at the same time as everybody else. But there's a tendency, it would have been easy to just bounce off of that and go, oh, I won't do that anymore.
Right.
Which would have been super not helpful and,
Right.
and kind of a useless, because
Right.
I would have done it, right?
Right.
So we had to take about 2 or 3 hours to really stop and go, okay, so then what happened? What was going on in that moment that led to that experience? So just the quick version is we realized, like, when I talk, this is unique to us, right? You have to do this. What I'm trying to get at is you have to figure out what is unique in the dynamic of your relationship, and there is no common code other than dig into it.
Yeah.
But what was going on there is when I talk through things, because I'm a verbal processor, it sounds like I know what I'm talking about.
Right.
A lot more than I do.
Right.
So to her, it was
or
sounding
that you have
like
drawn conclusions.
you figured all this out. You just sit around. You come to all these conclusions.
Right.
You have these deeply formed opinions. You don't talk about them with me, and you wait around until there's someone that's more worthwhile, more worth your time for you to talk about it.
Yes.
What was really going on is, I guess this has been perculating in the back of my brain. I had no idea.
You're thinking out loud.
The circumstance brought it out,
Right.
and then boom, here it is.
Right.
So, just jumping to the end, what we were then able to name is a pattern, and I was able to say, what would be really helpful to me in that is literally if you would just ask me what I'm thinking about at any given time.
That's good.
And that may sound like so artificial, like, but I literally, I need that because I don't know all the time and so we've developed this pattern where when we have those times and spaces, we're just in the car and it's quiet. Every now and then she'll be like, hey, what's something you've been thinking about lately? And I'll go, oh, that's interesting. And it's taken a lot of work because I don't, we developed this pattern where I go, oh, well, yesterday I was kind of musing on this thing. Oh, that's interesting. Let's talk about it. And we will have a conversation about that's privileged because it's just us first.
Yes.
And we'll do that. But there was a both and thing where neither of us could just function intuitively around that issue. We had to both get to a point where she's going to do some things that are a little unnatural or uncomfortable for her. I'm going to do some things that are a little unnatural and uncomfortable for me, so that and that has brought a lot of health and value in our relationship.
Muscles and skills. I mean, they're new skills you have to develop.
So I guess to synthesize all of that, when you identify an area of disempowerment, because that's exactly what that was, right? Keep pushing until you have named a pattern that is a little bit unnatural for both sides of the equation. Because you haven't gotten there until you're both having to kind of stretch outside of your normal mode just a bit. That would be one, right? So what is a
so
way
neither
where...
of you is being gift driven.
Well, it would be helpful to the language that has worked for us is something that would help me do that for you is this.
Yes.
So if you could do this, if you could engage me in this way,
Sure.
that would make it a lot easier for me to engage you in the way you're saying would be helpful, and we kind of create that dynamic. But that took us 3 hours of talking to figure out. So
Right.
that's a good way of like, look for patterns that are a little unnatural to both sides.
That's very good.
Another one that I heard you name that I think is really, really important, I think it's intuitive in your thinking because this is so obvious to you, but it's not obvious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Specifically look for the ways where your spouse's wiring is different than yours. That may sound like such an obvious thing.
That's critical.
But that's a big
which means you need to really know each other's wiring. You need to have handles,
opens up a whole
data.
bushel of apples.
You bet it
How
does.
do you get there? But another one I know for Mindy, like it took me a while to realize, oh my goodness, this specific aspect of who she is that's really, really different than me.
Yes.
I have just adopted as a premise that when that thing starts coming up, I shut up because she has some things that I just genuinely don't have. I have learned to value and understand. It's in the whole
But you've got to create space for
intuition, right?
Yeah, right.
Mindy's intuitive radar is so high.
Yes.
And early on in our marriage, it was she would, but it comes in a way where she has intuitions before she can explain them.
Right.
And I was always pushing like, well, what do you mean and why? And why is that? She's
Right.
like, I don't know. And then we'd stop talking about it. So I have pushed myself to a point of when, as soon as that thing picks up, I just stop talking because I assume that she is intuiting some things, and every single time that has happened, it's been 100% right. She's intuiting some stuff, and I just literally didn't have the data that she was instinctively pulling together.
Right.
And then as we started talking through, but sometimes it's like weeks of her just being like, I don't feel good about this. That's hard for me as a metric.
Sure.
But it's been super, super, super valuable.
That's good.
But it only came literally through recognizing this is an aspect of her wiring that's different than mine.
Right.
Every time that's on the table, I'm going to treat that as like 100 times more significant than what I would normally think that it is, specifically because I normally wouldn't recognize or value that.
Space for.
But I'm going to track that in her, and when that's on the table, and she does the same thing with me in certain ways, honing in on, and actually, you should be, I will throw this out as a posit, as an idea. If someone asked you, Doug, what are some of the most powerful aspects of Charlene's wiring? You should be able to name them. And if you can't, then you've got a lot of really fun dates ahead of you to hang out and figure that stuff out concretely and intentionally be able to name them, not just sort of, well, she's nice or whatever.
Are you aware that the dynamic you described in you, Mindy, is almost word for word describing an early dynamic in Charlene?
Yeah, no, we talked about this.
In our marriage, where, again, for Charlene, partly I think because of her prophetic wiring and whatever different components, she would sense things, and this is a little bit different than the gift of suspicion thing I mentioned earlier. This is just, again, she's just picking things up, and the way she would experience it, I thought I would just trying to get better handles to understand what she's saying. She would experience it as badgering, like I'm like, so why do you think that? What do you mean? Give me more handles. And so she would just back down because she felt bad.
I can't explain myself.
I can't explain, and I guess if I can't explain it well, then it must not count. I shouldn't bring it up.
Exactly.
And she learned how to retreat and whatever. And so that took years to unfold. And for me, it's still a discipline to not kick into that. Now I think it's been going long enough that if she begins to say something, I realize I'm starting to do that more often than not, and can pull back and say, what are you picking up and whatever.
Or just acknowledging it.
Yeah, but that's just back to the wiring thing. I think the simple premise that one of our most critical and urgent tasks early in marriage needs to be deeply understanding each other's wiring. Just personality types, motivational gifts, values, saboteurs, core needs, as much data as you can get, clear second nature, and then all your children, your family system, all of that should just be second nature.
Right.
And when you said, at this point I just kind of take it for granted. Yes, but every once in a while I have like a wake-up call, like this one couple that we were interacting with who was having some marriage challenges, to understate it significantly. And they did. It was clear to Charlene and I that one of the critical issues here is they were just completely
Yeah.
going, just flying past each other in terms of wiring, just deeply not understanding each other. Our definition of what it means to understand someone else, which I got from another mentor earlier in my life, is understanding someone involves standing under their perspective. I need to stand under your perspective if I want to understand you. And the only way I can really stand under your perspective is if I get who you are. And so I need to stand under your perspective as a whatever, as an introvert, as a thinker,
Sure.
as a
That's good.
as a whatever the thing might be, as a mercy motivated person in motivational gifts, or as a
The very thing that I think is silly or irrelevant or incomprehensible.
I have to put myself in your shoes and see the situation from that perspective to really understand you, essentially. So anyway, so we're interacting with this couple, and we were starting to delve into why their marriage was literally teetering on the brink of divorce at the time. And we basically discovered they have no frame of reference, no handles, they haven't really ever stopped and really spent much time on how is my spouse wired, and how am I wired, and what are the implications of that? And then the shocker, she had a degree in social work that included, she was an expert on Myers-Briggs. And Charlene and I were just like this collective gag. It's like, what would you say his? Well, I don't know. I never really.
Yeah.
And like right there was a microcosm of what was in the process of becoming a failed marriage that did end in divorce. It was just breathtaking. And I mean, it's like you would say, well, isn't that obvious? No, evidently it's not obvious to us.
Right.
And I'm not blaming and shaming if you don't come from a background where this is part of how you do life and marriage. No, you're not gonna just kick into this gear automatically. It needs to become standard operating procedure.
Right.
And I think in all marriages and all family cultures.
So, a couple of principles then. If you're at that point of, man, I would love to dig into this. Like this week, what are some things? Carve out intentional time that is not about the business of life.
Right.
Carve
Yes.
out the intentional
Right.
time that's literally just about, I'm going to get to know you in
This
some
week we're going to
deeper
focus on
ways.
you, and next week we'll focus on me. We go back and forth.
And there's
Or
resources
however.
that are available for
Yes.
ways of structuring that. But so carve out the intentional time. When there's conflict or push until you've defined patterns or language that is a bit of a stretch for both sides.
Yes, good.
Instead of just something that works for one.
I have
and
a
the
prior
other
one that you're assuming. I
Yes.
think here.
Probably true.
Build in outside perspective.
That I was going to say that
Okay,
one third.
all right, okay,
yeah.
you've got to
Can't
have
do this in isolation.
outside perspective. Get help. I am fond of saying something that I still have not had anybody prove this to be untrue. Charlene and I probably have gotten more outside help consistently throughout our marriage than any couple I know. Not because, people say, oh my gosh, they're like, you get counseling? Well, yeah, we've gotten counseling. We've had marriage mentors. We've related to my parents in a way that got outside perspective, peers, whatever it might be. And it's because we're so committed to a high quality marriage that's been an intentional thing. But I've been surprised over the years to discover for how that's evidently a rare way of doing things. Like, we'll get help if we're really pressed to the wall and things are really blowing up or falling apart. But when things are generally okay,
Right.
why would we get
need
help?
that?
No, the basic premise is we all need outside perspective all the time in our lives, and that's never more true than in the area of marriage. So have some people that just track with you,
That's good.
that give you outside perspective you can bounce things off of. Don't wait till you have a crisis.
That's good.
Build that in, and then in the process, when you're saying, we feel like we need to really start to get to know each other in some new ways, ask for outside perspective on that. How should we do it? Get other people tracking it with you, and then come up with a plan, literally a strategy, a plan that you implement that gets onto your calendars and nature of conversations, things you read, whatever, that you are accountable to somebody else for, not just we're going to do this as long as we're all both, feeling it at the moment. No, get accountable to somebody outside yourself, get help in the process. And there's a lot of great resources out there that you can tap into.
Yeah.
One other thing that we're I think both of us are assuming and not naming, in addition to the wiring dimensions we've talked about, values. Core values, your personal values and your values for marriage as a married couple. I think because you've grown up in a Destiny Discovery Quest world where we work on values early on, that's kind of natural to you. And you, frankly, you and Mindy, this is a real strength in your lives and marriages and in your coaching of other people. But one of the things that you started your marriage out with already in place was a great deal of clarity about values, core values, personal, and then together. If you don't have a good handle on what your values for marriage are together, we have a set of core values that define when we say we want a really good marriage.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? What are those? What specific?
How do you know if you have it or
how
you
do you
don't?
know if your marriage is healthy and thriving the way you intend and want it to be? And that actually references a set of values that you should be able to name.
Yeah.
And if you aren't there yet, that's another place to start. In addition just to wiring is working on your values. And if you're not sure how to do that, ask for help. And the Destiny Discovery Quest process has a good whole section on that. That's
design.
Now living by design.
Yes.
Historical Destiny Discovery Quest. Now living by design.
Yes. So carve out the intentional time. That's got to. You have to start with the premise that you can't squeeze this into the margins of your life.
Intentionality overall, but specifically as it relates
literally
to time.
make actual time where this is what you're doing. You're engaging each other around these things. Bring in and cultivate outside perspective. Get to know each other at a really deep, not just but concretely some of the stuff that we've been circling around: wiring, values, patterns, all these different pieces.
An intentional process over time, as if you were excavating an archaeological site.
Right. And then finally, use that information in the context of a supportive relational network, because you have the intentional time carved out, to craft your own language and set of patterns that facilitate an empowered relational dynamic.
Which includes a set of guidelines that you agree to about how you're going to relate together, given your particular wiring and your particular, ways of being together and independent.
And those are things that you can sit down and ask yourself, how are some ways I'm going to work at those things this week? Not wait for, well, someday we'll take a vacation.
When you say it that way, I sit back and I think, that sounds like hard work. That sounds like a lot of work.
It is.
Which is probably a good illustration of why, if we can just kind of be on autopilot and coast and not do this kind of thing, wouldn't we prefer that? And the answer is yes. The path of least resistance, the law of least effort. That's what we would prefer. The reality is that does not lead where we want to. That road takes us somewhere that we don't want to go. So the sooner we decide it's worth the intentionality, the energy, the effort, the structured process to take it to that level, the better.
Let me ask you this way as we wrap up. In your experience, as probably certainly the person that I know in the world who has spent the most time intentionally engaging marriage relationships, have you ever come across a healthy, fully empowered marriage relationship like you're describing that just sort of happened with no work, and they just got lucky and they just synergize? And have you ever seen that?
Absolutely not.
I've never seen it, but you've seen more marriages. So
you scratch beneath the surface of any marriage that's thriving, and they'll happily tell you the hard work that went into it.
Cool. So it's just a choice then. You
choice.
get to choose whether, if that is what you want, that's how you get there. There are no shortcuts, and you can't just cross your fingers and hope that you'll trip into it.
And you have to decide that coexisting, a live and let live philosophy, well, at least we're not divorced approach to life.
Not good enough.
Probably is, you have to decide that's not what you want. You want more than that, because God has more for you.
Yes. And the flip side of that, in your experience, have you ever seen a couple, or would you say for yourself, that is at that point, that isn't categorically clear that it was completely worth it and life is exponentially more fun and fulfilling because of that factor than without it?
I'll do that, a qualified answer. Absolutely yes, in the most of the time, in the broad perspective, there are moments.
There are those day-to-day moments.
There are moments in the process where either one of us, if you get a certain time, is like, oh, this is such hard work.
Where's my eject button?
and the fact is we have those feelings, which is why I'm really glad what we have is a marriage covenant, not a marriage contract. That can be easily. So the covenant carries us through those times, and the people around us carry through, and God himself carries us through those times. In the larger perspective, absolutely no question. Wouldn't want it any other way, but good marriage is hard work.